that where you guys are trying to find a fax machine?
That was where we, so Scott Weedman challenged us, find a fax machine. We found one fax machine in the week we were there, and it was in a FedEx office or a UPS store or something. It was one of those. That was the only place we could find a fax machine. And we had heard from expats and whatever overseas
I
that,
went back to our thread and I
you know,
realized we
the
said
current
you
rules,
can have coffee when I come back.
you know, people, they want to get their ballot back, but they can't mail it sometimes.
Right.
So, because it'll never reach in time, and the post office overseas is in terrible shape. So we just had those discussions.
Right.
Good to see you.
Hi. Good morning.
And why would anybody in their normal life fax anymore?
Well, we maintained one in our office in our elections division,
For the
but we never, you know, we might receive 3 faxes a year. It's just outdated, but that's what
fax
people
and
are
all.
doing.
Do you have a fax?
Although it's required,
Yes.
right? California, Florida. So when you're looking at your project one way, don't forget that 33 states have to electronically return a ballot. You're looking for guidance. You're using a fax machine.
And the problem is, and we ran into it in Vermont after I retired. In Vermont, they were trying to get EBR approved for Vermont, and the discussion elevated to, we don't believe in internet voting. This is not internet voting. It's not internet voting. It's document transfer. That's what you're doing, is you're transferring a ballot that you've already voted.
But you're going to start with just right now.
Sorry, I came in at the tail end.
Yeah.
It's just
No, that's okay.
one way. The ballot.
So how does this? What is it that we're? What is it that we're chatting about? How does it differ from that CISA framework that they put out in 2020?
The CISA framework only talks about going out.
Right.
It doesn't, and it talks about email and fax. Doesn't talk about not return of ballots.
Doesn't that framework from that 10-pager that they did? I think that
Brian would know better.
Yeah, I think the focal point is actually on the blank ballot stuff.
But the problem is, I mean, for instance, let's put this in perspective.
The problem is getting people to get the ballot back in time.
Exactly, you know this.
I'm aware. No. I know, and I at least know what the argument is. But it's
And what's happened is, like Vermont, and there's a bunch of other states, requires the ballots to be back by 7 p.m. on election night. But some states are gone, I mean, I think like California's 10 days.
And that's why they can get away with it, and then they got called out afterwards. But if they were like Arizona, then they'd be thrown through the ringer.
It's crazy. And actually, some of my Republican colleagues, when I was on NAS, used to take issue with me because I said there needs to be some national standards that we follow, that everybody follows. We can administer in many different ways, but there has to be, like, do we want a paper ballot? Should we require a paper ballot in all jurisdictions? Because this was at a time when people were going to the touch screens, and we were saying, you know, I think personally that, you know, Vermont actually embedded it into its statutes back in 2000. I was there because I was on the committee, you know, what's wrong with requiring a ballot, a paper ballot? We have a paper ballot for every vote that's cast.
On the paper ballot piece, exception obviously figuring out some of the kinks around the accessibility community.
Well, and
I'm
we have
there
that.
with you, right? I'm actually allowed to have international clients outside the U.S.
Well, we did some work with the State Department. They selected us to do Middle East. There was a USAID did something, but no, we were primarily about 34 states.
Right. You guys guys are stateside, I'm sorry.
But that's why I'm in part here to look at, they invited us to speak at the United Nations a few years ago about mostly disabled, disability voters. There's like 1 billion voters with disabilities around the world. They're trying to figure that out.
Well, and in Vermont, we actually
do it so people know that this is like
This is yes.
so we're like here like in the parties. Not the same.
Of course, on your own work issues, you have two sections.
But I can do one thing. So after I speak, I should sit, but I won't sit. I've been speaking for 10 minutes when I sit there, so maybe I will sit again. I think the last. You guys sit here, and then I will my class.
Okay. Congratulations. So, I know it's not this, but I can't do. I'm gonna remember that. My problem is that somebody else is gonna now take that. Nobody saw that. Nobody else did.
Well, yes, I tried. Good morning. Bienvenue à l'ambassade du Canada. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is David Nelson. I'm the counselor in the Foreign and Defense Policy section. You'll all be happy to know that I'm going to hand over the floor very soon to our Deputy Ambassador. Sara Cohen, our Deputy Head of Mission, will be giving some introductory remarks, and then we will launch into the program. So thank you again for joining us. Sara?
Thank you, David, and welcome to everybody, including our friends who are joining us online. It's a real pleasure for me to be able to welcome you here to the embassy and to open this event. My remarks today have a bit of a feel of the sort of good news, bad news paradigm, and I think I'll start with, if not the bad news, then maybe what is a bit the preoccupying news and the concerning news that brings us all here together today. 2024, the biggest election year in most of our collective recent history in terms of what that means for democratic processes worldwide, which of course is not bad news, it's excellent news. The preoccupying part of that paradigm, of course, is that we can expect, therefore, a great deal more attempts to undermine electoral integrity to secure specific outcomes, including through the manipulation of domestic laws and regulations, violence and intimidation, and the spread of disinformation. AI amplifies these threats, which presents challenges for protecting the integrity of elections. I'm not telling you anything new here. The creation of AI-generated synthetic content, such as deepfakes, can lead to citizens questioning credible sources of information and undermine public trust in democratic processes, including in elections. These risks are compounded by the proliferation of accessible and modifiable AI models that may help malign actors evade safeguards. The impact of AI-generated disinformation during elections will deepen as the quality and quantity of the technology's output continues to exceed the capacity of election management bodies, election observers, or regulators to detect, debunk, or remove it. Adversaries leverage generative AI, supercharging disinformation efforts in several ways. They generate realistic synthetic content through videos, audio, text, or images to discredit an individual. Adversaries also profile individuals or groups based on their digital footprint so that they can be targeted with tailored content. These adversaries translate content with increasing ease, accuracy, and credibility, and create distrust in the information space in its entirety. We've seen these tactics at play in the Slovak and Taiwanese contexts in 2023 and 2024, respectively, where external actors used AI to target political figures and journalists with the assessed aim of discrediting the individuals and democratic institutions and processes such as elections. And of course, these efforts disproportionately affect women and girls, resulting in a silencing effect on the political ambition and engagement of women and girls. So I promised you some good news. And the good news links directly to the event today and the importance of the Canadian partnership with International IDEA, and also International IDEA's work and what brings us together today. During Canada's chairship of IDEA in 2022, we committed to supporting the establishment of a Digitalization and Democracy program at International IDEA. Through this support, International IDEA has been able to consolidate and expand its global comparative knowledge work on digitalization and democracy. The report being launched today, AI for Electoral Management, was made possible by this Canadian support. We've also recently approved support for a 3-year project that we're funding with International IDEA on combating electoral foreign information manipulation and combating electoral foreign information manipulation and interference, as well as addressing existing legal and policy vulnerabilities that enable FIMI. A little bit easier. This $2.5 million initiative aims to increase the capacity of civil society in countering FIMI. The project is designed to ensure full participation and contribution of women as team members, experts, researchers, authors, and boundary partners. These collaborations have strengthened the partnership between Canada and International IDEA in advancing and protecting democracy through digital approaches and tools. We're also pleased to be leading the G7 Rapid Response Mechanism on an ongoing basis to enhance collaboration to identify and respond to foreign threats to democracy like disinformation. RRM Canada monitors foreign information operations and supports Canada's electoral integrity. Its role is to act as an early warning system by providing open source data analytics pertaining to threats to democracy and leveraging the RRM network for information exchange and potential response. More recently, the RRM has established a working group on mitigating heightened risks to the information environment from generative AI. The Public Diplomacy Division of NATO leads this working group. And across the board, we find that the RRM has allowed the G7 and our partners to strengthen our collective understanding of foreign threats and sharpen our respective capacities to counter them, boosting the resilience of our societies. We will, of course, continue using our diplomatic and programming channels to protect and build resilient electoral processes globally. So given the bad news bit, but then also given the good news bit, and I do like to position Canada as part of the good news story, the publication that is being launched today, AI for Electoral Management, is a really significant contribution to understanding the rapidly evolving field of AI and its potential use to enhance the management of electoral processes. It also addresses how electoral institutions can better address potential threats posed by AI and makes all of you very much part of that good news story. This contribution is, of course, timely considering the super electoral cycle I mentioned that is taking place this year, with half the world's population heading to the polls, marking the first elections in which AI will play a significant role. Canada's next federal election is due by the fall of 2025, so we have a bit of time on our side to learn lessons from elections taking place this year and to review this report for good ideas and things to avoid. This document will need to evolve, of course, as countries, including Canada, test new and untried approaches in this field at a really rapid pace, experiencing a steep learning curve in the years to come as we all determine what works and what doesn't in this area. International IDEA has entered the debate early to fill a critical gap and to leverage its expertise in identifying entry points for AI use in different parts of the electoral cycle. It collects emerging good practices worldwide and facilitates the sharing of experiences. The report also offers recommendations for developing clear, transparent, and rights-respecting rules for implementing AI-supported tools. International IDEA's contribution to the field of AI and elections is crucial, as AI is a rapidly evolving category of largely unregulated technologies, with little research conducted so far on its potential impact on elections. And so to sum up, we are really honored to host this timely launch at the Canadian Embassy to the United States, especially given that many innovative examples of AI use by election administrations are being explored at the state level in the US, turning state-level election administrations into true innovation labs on AI ahead of the November elections. Many examples in the report are therefore from the US, making it particularly relevant to launch it here. We're honored again to have key experts in this emerging field join us for the discussion, providing both an international perspective and a US perspective on these emerging technologies and their implications for elections. And so finally, thanks to NDI, the Alliance for Securing Democracy at the German Marshall Fund, for joining us in this discussion. Thank you to the chairman of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, Commissioner Hovland, who will also join us for this important discussion. I'll now hand the floor over to Alberto Fernández Gibaja, Head of Digitalization and Democracy, International IDEA, who will present the key findings of the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction, for the kind words, and I think the Deputy Head of Mission, Sara Cohen, made a very good summary already of the publication. Thank you all of you for being here, and I want to extend a special thank you to the Canadian Embassy for hosting us in presenting this publication. I would try not to take a lot of time actually presenting the publication for two reasons. The content of the publication is very extensive, and it will take me hours to go through all of it, so I don't want to keep you here for hours. The second one is because I think the most interesting part of today is going to be the panel. We have great speakers from NDI, from Microsoft, from the German Marshall Fund, so I think that's what you all want to listen to. So and then let's see if technology is on our side. There, it never works. So today I want to walk you through these ideas. Why are we talking about this? How artificial intelligence can make elections better? What are the risks and challenges associated to that? The external threats to elections, regulation, and the way forward. So let me start with, why are we talking about artificial intelligence now? And I don't know if someone wants to take that question. We're talking about artificial intelligence now a lot for two main reasons. There are more reasons, but I want to go to two main reasons. The first one is advances in deep learning, especially in transformers architecture. And I asked ChatGPT, what is transformers architecture? So the explanation that it gave me, and then I checked this, that is true, it's basically the connection of data points, the way each data point relates to each other. And that technology and that understanding has improved significantly in the last years. It's basically, if you think about reading a sentence, it's the connection between the meaning of the different words in that sentence. It basically gives artificial intelligence the capacity to understand. And I don't know if there is a computer scientist in the room. If so, and if I'm not wrong, then if I'm wrong, please correct me. I would blame ChatGPT about that. The second innovation that we have, and it's not an innovation, is that we keep proving Gordon Moore, co-founder of Intel, right. We keep doubling the number of transistors that we get into a microchip every 2 years. That implies many things, including that chip manufacturing has become a key geopolitical issue, but implies more computing power. We get more power to understand data and to feed the transformers architecture, to feed this capacity of artificial intelligence to understand. So what does it imply? What are the consequences of this, apart from using ChatGPT to edit our presentations? This implies less interpretability. We are it becomes very difficult to know what happens between asking an artificial intelligence system to do something and the output. So we don't know exactly what goes on in that black box between us asking, please create a picture of a sunny day, and the picture that we get. The same way, we wouldn't know what happens exactly if we give them a database of people and ask that system, tell me which one is more likely to commit a crime. We don't know what happens inside. Or we have problems to interpret exactly what happens inside. That also implies that we have more capacity to train, to give data to artificial intelligence and to make it more intelligent. That for elections has a clear consequence, is that it gives us a good opportunity to use it more for elections, to make it better, faster, more secure, to protect the integrity of elections. But doing that implies a lot of challenges and a lot of concerns. So that was our departing point for the publication. And then we wrote this publication thinking on electoral management bodies. What do they need to know? How can we make sure that they have the right knowledge, up to what we have right now, to use artificial intelligence when it's a good idea to use artificial intelligence? How to use it, what measures do they need to do to protect the process? So we came up with a number of use cases. We usually write publications that look at what has happened, and this one is the opposite. We're looking at what might happen and then try to be ready for that. Before going into the details, I want to say something, and it's that electoral management bodies and everybody working on democracy should not break anything that works. So technologies shouldn't break things that are actually working. It should solve problems that need to be solved. So the original idea, the important idea is don't break anything that works. Use technology to solve things that are not working, and there is no other solution, or using technology will be the best solution. So we divided, you all probably familiar with the electoral cycle, we divided the the electoral cycle, the cases in the 3 phases of the electoral cycle. And the first one is a number of uses that can be done during the pre-election phase. We identify voter registration and eligibility, planning, and voter education. Things like cleaning the voter rolls from duplications, forecasting the cost of an election, using chatbots to answer questions of potential voters. Where do I vote? Where is the closest polling station to me? What is being decided in this election, that type of things. During the election, we forecast a few uses, including campaign and media monitoring, using artificial intelligence to monitor the media, voter operations, polling place monitoring, tabulation and analysis. So these things like video monitoring of voting stations, biometric identification, media monitoring, and trying to prevent disinformation. And I know what you're all thinking, and I hope many of you are thinking this. This is a very bad idea. Do not do that. And that's precisely what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring that message with this publication to electoral management bodies of, if you want to do this, just don't do it without thinking. You need to take a lot of precautions. You need to be aware of the implications of this, and you need to be prepared for those implications. And then you could use them. So I will go into the implications later on. Finally, the post-electoral phase is mostly the use cases are analyzing the electoral results. Audits, financial consolidation, seeing that the parties have spent actually what they say they have spent, that type of things. If you go to the publication, you will find all this unpacked in many different cases with details and an explanation of what the actual potential use is. But let me go to the concerns, the negative side of things. These are the positive uses, and these uses are very positive, but there are many concerns that need to be addressed. It's not that they preclude them from using, but they need to be addressed. So the first one is performance. Performance, accuracy, and the sustainability for the task. Many of these uses require 100% accuracy, or as close as possible to 100%. And artificial intelligence might not be able to provide that accuracy. It might not be able to have that performance of getting things right every single time. Think about cleaning a voter list. If there is a mistake, you are basically withdrawing the right to vote to an individual. That has implications, that is also linked with human rights, bias, and discrimination. In many uses, think about video monitoring for violence. Bias and discrimination that is embedded into the training data that has been used for artificial intelligence, because that's the data we have. It can negatively affect the results. If we have data that has strong bias on traditionally marginalized communities, we might have problems when we try to use it for instance, predicting violence. We all have seen Minority Report, right? Another risk and challenge that we face linked to these two is public trust and transparency. It doesn't matter, and I think we are in the right city to know that, it doesn't matter how well the elections are run, it's a matter of trust and transparency. And if people don't trust elections, and our data shows that globally there is a decrease in trust on elections, even if the election is perfectly run and there is nothing to mistrust, introducing artificial intelligence might affect the trust that people has on the electoral process. So using it also implies that you need to explain what you're using it, and going back, there is a lack of interpretability that needs to be put into the picture, but people need to trust the systems and the technologies that are being used. And the last one is cybersecurity. And I can't highlight enough the importance of this and how it's becoming more and more important. Any use of artificial intelligence introduces new cybersecurity risks. Even introducing the risk of not owning your own voting infrastructure. An electoral management body will not own the voting infrastructure that is being used. And it creates a lot of vulnerabilities. So on top of this, there is going to be actors using artificial intelligence. There is going to be parties, candidates, media, people trying to profit out of this information that is going to be using artificial intelligence. So that's something that electoral management bodies also need to be ready for. We cluster this in 3 big buckets of potential uses. The first one is misinformation, information integrity, and you all have heard a lot about this, the uses of deepfakes, deceiving artificial intelligence generated content, and intentional misinformation from the lack of accuracy sometimes of chatbots. We more or less familiar with the implications of this. A second one is, again, cybersecurity from the other perspective. The higher quality of cybersecurity attacks, phishing attacks, which it's the most simple one, but actually the most effective ones when it comes to electoral management bodies. The potentially more capable malware used by rogue actors that are trying to infiltrate the systems. So artificial intelligence, in principle, I'm not an expert on cybersecurity, but in principle, increases the capacity of actors to attack the security of digital systems. And the third one is something that usually is not that well considered, which is the use by campaigns, even if it's with good intentions. There are risks of, for instance, collecting data from the population. Is this data being protected? The analysis of the data, the use of artificial intelligence for advertisement, for political advertisement. Campaigns might want to use it because it's faster, cheaper, it creates more content, but there is a lot of risk on campaignings, political campaigns using artificial intelligence, and electoral management bodies need to be aware of that. So what do we do? Let me give you 8 ideas of what can we do to leverage this potentially extremely powerful technology to both make our elections better, but also to protect our elections from potential misuses. So the first one, and if you just want to keep one idea of what I'm saying, keep this one, is stick to the principle of necessity, data minimization, and proportionality. As a European, I cannot stop but saying this is the golden standard of our European Union GDPR legislation. Necessity, data minimization, and proportionality should be the golden rule. Let's start from there. Anything that has data, start from there. For EMBs, that should be also the thinking. Data minimization, proportionality, and necessity. Second one, also keep this one in mind. Focus on marginalized communities and the negative externalities. It's very, very likely that whatever negative effect that artificial intelligence might have will be exponentially more negative for traditionally marginalized communities. So we should focus on them and give them agency and work with them from the design phase, from the beginning, to make sure that they don't suffer more the consequences than other groups. The third one, always, 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 I don't know how many times I can say always, implement human oversight. Put always a person in the loop, not only in the loop, at the end of the decision-making process. Do not allow, we are not at that point where we can allow artificial intelligence to make decisions. We might be in the future, I don't know, but we're not at that point. So always, always have a human in the loop, especially at the end. And not just rubber stamping the decisions of a machine, just making sure that the decisions need a human oversight. The fourth one is carry out audits on security, on performance, on ethics. Just test and carry out audits. And there is a lot of potential for those audits to get things right and to shape the way artificial intelligence systems work, and also to red team, see what others might be using artificial intelligence and prepare for that. Fifth one is to work very closely with communities to identify misinformation, and it's very, very linked to the second one. The communities that are most affected will be the ones that know more about this, and they will be more capable of helping electoral management bodies to address these issues. The sixth one is to get the tech companies in the picture. Not only getting in the picture, like actively collaborate with them. They know better, and we have here Jeannie from Microsoft telling more about this. But tech companies don't have any interest in elections going wrong. Like, why would they have this? They actually, the contrary, they want elections to run smoothly, so they don't have problems around elections. And they have the expertise, they have the technology, they have the people. Electoral management bodies should include them and collaborate actively with them. The seventh one this is my favorite one. Hold politicians accountable. Very easy. But it's doable, it's actually doable. It is possible, but we need to make regulatory reforms. For instance, think about, this is not an international ID official statement, but think about things like labeling, making an electoral offense when somebody doesn't use the right labels when using artificially intelligent, AI-generated content. That might become an electoral offense, for instance. That type of regulatory innovations need to be put in place if we want to hold politicians accountable. And the last one, for the third time, strengthen cybersecurity. Because even if artificial intelligence was not a new thing, this should be always a recommendation, strengthen cybersecurity. We are one cybersecurity event away from spend the next 5 years of our lives speaking about cybersecurity in elections. Which I don't know enough, so I don't want to. So strengthen cybersecurity is fundamental. There is so much more in the publication. I feel that I just presented the executive, not even the executive summary. So go to our website, idea.int, download the publication, hope you can find it. Download the publication, read it, give us feedback, anything that we have missed, anything that you think doesn't make sense, just give us feedback. We haven't printed it as a PDF, so we can change it. And thank you very much for listening.
You have your coffee. Okay. You have your coffee. That was good. I got 2 orders.
Thank you so much, Alberto, for this excellent overview. I hope it has enticed you to read the full report that you can find on our website, www.idea.int. We're moving over to the next part of this event. It's going to be a panel discussion with key experts, international and US experts in the field that are starting to accumulate knowledge on this emerging field. I'm Annika Silva-Leander. I'm head of North America for International IDEA. I head our offices here in Washington, D.C. and in New York, where we have representation at the UN. And I'll be moderating this discussion. Also, warm thanks to Canada and to the embassy for hosting us today in this very wonderful room. Thanks also to Canada for supporting International IDEA's Digitalization and Democracy program. Thanks to Canada's support, we have been able to establish this program little less than a year ago. The program consolidates experience that we've had for more than a decade in the area of technology and democracy with a focus on elections. And we're expanding now to more areas of work. And this is one of the first reports that we are putting out within this work stream. So thanks so much to Canada for enabling that and for hosting us today. We have a great panel of experts, and the idea of launching this report here in DC is because we wanted to bridge the US conversations and the international conversations on AI and elections. This is a super election year. More than half of the world's population is going to the polls. And AI was recently introduced as a technology, and many of these elections and election administrations around the world are grappling with how to integrate and use this technology in a safe and secure way. And so there is a lot of learning that can happen across countries. The US can learn from other countries, and other countries can stand to learn from the US. Actually, a lot of the emerging innovations that we're seeing are happening in the US, but we expect that this is going to spread also to other countries in the world. So the idea is to be able to have this bridging these conversations between the US conversation and the international ones. And that's why we have these experts with us. Some of them are more focused on the US, some of them have international experience, some of them have both. So let me start by introducing the panelists. So at the end, Alberto Fernández Gibaja, who presented our report, International Idea. He heads our Digitalization and Democracy program. He's based in Stockholm normally, so thanks, Alberto, for making it all the way here to Washington. We have with us also Julia Brothers, Senior Advisor for Elections at NDI. NDI has been a leader in the field of democracy and technology for many years, and is now getting into the area of AI and elections as well. So we'll hear from Julia about the support that NDI is giving to partners around the world that are managing elections and how AI comes into the picture. We also have with us Ginny Badanes, General Manager of Democracy Forward at Microsoft. Democracy Forward is a Microsoft initiative to address ongoing challenges to the stability of democracies globally, including protecting elections and information integrity around elections. So we'll hear from Ginny on the support that Microsoft does in this area and your thoughts on AI and elections. We also have with us David Levine, here to my left, a Senior Elections Integrity Fellow at the Alliance for Securing Democracy at the German Marshall Fund. In your role at GMF, you assess vulnerabilities of electoral infrastructure, administration, and policies around the world, but you also have extensive experience from managing elections in the US. So let me start off with the first round of questions, and I'll go not in chronological order here, but I'll turn to Julia to start with. And you can use the microphone there. You don't have to press the on button. It should be on already. Yeah.
Yep, there we go. Pull it out.
Now we know what to do. And so, Julia, you are elections advisor at NDI. You all know NDI. NDI works in more than 50 countries around the world, and elections is an important area of focus. And during this super cycle election year that we're almost halfway into right now, NDI is supporting electoral stakeholders around the world through its programming. So would you be able to tell us, Julia, what you have observed so far when it comes to the role that AI is playing with regards to electoral integrity in the countries where NDI operates? Over to you, Julia.
Sure. Yeah, so, NDI, we are mostly, in terms of elections, we are election observers, and we work with citizen election observers around the world on electoral monitoring, analysis, and reform, including monitoring the information environment around elections, because we know that that is an electoral integrity issue. So I can tell you a little bit of what we're seeing, what we're not seeing. Certainly, we are seeing generative AI playing a role in online campaigns. Sometimes that is sort of officially where you can see a direct link between a party or a candidate's campaign and the content itself. And in some cases, more in a more opaque way, where there's content that certainly benefits a political actor, but it's not clear the source, right? I think, we've seen this we've seen it in Bangladesh, we've seen it in Pakistan, we're seeing it in Mexico right now, we're seeing it in Ghana, we're seeing it in India. I think one of the, often this is also, either audio or audio and video. I think one thing we need to think about, though, is sort of and what we have less clarity about is the impact. One of the things that scares us, right, about generative AI is that it is harder to detect, that it is harder to fact check. Because it's more realistic, it can be, more convincing. But what we also know is that sort of shallow fakes are still very effective. Sometimes all you need is Photoshop. And people are sort of going to find whatever they can find to reinforce a belief that they have. And so, I think it's important to have this conversation, but I think we also need to think about, is it more important to think about the manipulation itself or the means of the manipulation? So we do see this very much, it's already happening. Generative AI is being used in political campaigns, either to improve the image of a candidate or, more often than not, to discredit a rival candidate or party. What we haven't seen much of yet, and I'm a little hesitant to put this out into the universe, is generative AI used to undermine confidence in the electoral process or the electoral results or outcome. Videos of discarded ballots or manipulated results forms, or, audio of a EMB chair saying something blatantly partisan. We haven't seen much from this in terms of generative AI, and I don't know if it's because there's still some restraint being practiced around that, or if we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, or if I've just cursed us all. But certainly once, if we were to get into that territory, I think that is incredibly dangerous, right? I mean, that can significantly erode confidence in elections and create, voter confusion and chaos. I think, more broadly, we're working with election observers on sort of how to confront this issue, and I think a challenge for all the election experts in this room is that this kind of confluence of digital advancements and electoral processes just means that we're dealing with a much more complex constellation of actors and stakeholders and incentives than we have in the past. We are reliant on, more reliant on, the ethics of companies that are offering, AI tools. We are more reliant on the efficacy of social media platforms to identify content and to label content, to enforce their own policies on AI, which we already know that they are not, that they are struggling to do. And to make information accessible to election observers and analysts so that we have a better sense of what's really going on in the political discourse, which is a growing challenge because that is becoming less and less accessible. We probably need to build more accountability around international political consultants and PR firms and marketing firms, right, that are driving some of these information strategies and making money off of them. So we're just in a very kind of vendor-driven environment right now. So I'm really glad that this guide has come out when it has, because we know that EMBs especially are often are approached by vendors to provide services, and AI sounds very sexy, and so that seems like a cool thing you should use. And we just want to make sure that we are thinking about this responsibly, that it's actually solving a problem, and an implementation that we're thinking about. Election day is not when these tools should ever be going live. That these are being piloted in low risk, low stakes events. So I think, I could talk for days about this. I know there's also the issue of chatbots, and we know that, that has been, in terms of voter information, has been sort of inconsistent in delivering accurate information. I think what we don't know is to what extent people are relying on chatbots for this kind of information, and what impact that's having as well. But I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks so much, Julia, for putting all these issues on the agenda. I think it's a really nice framing of the conversation, and also confirming from you that are watching a lot of these experiences around the world that we haven't yet seen, the most dangerous uses of this technology, but it's good that we are having this discussion and thinking ahead about what could happen and what the risks are and how to mitigate them when those situations occur in the future, if they do. But I think it's a very good transition to the next question. You were talking about the role and the responsibility of the private sector, and we'll turn to Ginny Badanes from Microsoft now with another question. Both Julia and Alberto referred to that one of the main risks that we're seeing is the use of deepfakes and other forms of deceptive AI-generated content for elections. And we know that Microsoft, together with many other leading tech companies, have signed the Tech Accord to combat the deceptive use of AI in the 2024 elections. And the Accord, as indicated by the title, is trying to put some measures in place to counter deceiving content in elections. So, Ginny, can you explain a bit more about the Accord itself, Microsoft's role in it, and how the Accord is starting to be implemented?
Sure, thank you. Well, first, congratulations to International IDEA for putting out this report. I can't imagine the amount of effort and time it took to try and encapsulate such a complicated topic across a global environment where we know elections are different everywhere and the way people will apply this kind of technology is going to differ. And so I look forward to reading it or asking AI to summarize it for me as soon as I get back to the office. So the Tech Accord came about as a result of a lot of work that, frankly, most of the major tech companies were already doing. The global election cycle, there are all sorts of different terms. I wish we could agree on one, but this massive global, whatever election cycle as we're calling it, a lot of us anticipated this, right? We looked at calendars, we knew this was coming. AI was actually, for a lot of us, the thing that was more surprising. The extent to which it hit the consumer market, where people were using this technology, the extent to which our own companies were diving in on it, that was actually a little bit less of the anticipated piece. But as we started building our programs, looking towards this cycle and how we were going to be responsible actors in this space, everyone we talked to wanted to talk about deepfakes, particularly policymakers, journalists. This was a very clear challenge that people could not quite get their mind around. I think for politicians, it felt very personal because they saw that they were likely going to be the subject of these deepfakes, which I'm sympathetic to. And so we were finding that while individually each of the companies had their own plans and they were doing good things, there was something missing that felt like a collective sort of acknowledgement of responsibility. So what we did in Munich, and really it was the months leading up to Munich, was get at a very high leadership level agreement that this is something that we as tech companies, felt like we needed to come together and have a unified voice on aspects of the challenge. And then from there, we really, at sort of the staff level, pushed ourselves to be as firm in commitments as we could. One thing that we were kind of concerned about is that this would imply that as tech companies, we were saying, don't worry, guys, we got it. We have it all figured out. You all don't need to worry about it. That's not at all what this was about. The reality is, as everyone who's having this conversation knows, the regulatory frameworks are just not there yet. There are some things that are emerging. There are some bills that have passed. There's the DSA. There are frameworks. There are voluntary commitments. But the reality is, it's going to take a while for governments around the world to really build structures around this, to create enforcement mechanisms for those things to go into place. And as you've said, we're halfway through this global election cycle already. And so to sort of punt to governments and say, well, go ahead and regulate us, we're waiting, felt like a punt. It felt like we weren't actually leaning into the responsibilities that we should have as tech companies. And so that's to say that we didn't expect or want anyone to think that what we were building was in lieu of regulation. It's instead, in this moment in time, this is what we are going to push ourselves to do. So that's sort of the framing for why we decided to get together and how our leadership asked us to, at sort of the staff level, put together some real firm commitments. The other thing that's, I think, interesting about the Tech Accord is that it was also really representative of all the different players in tech who have something to do with AI. So we have the AI generation companies, so OpenAI, Anthropic, those folks who were making the same commitments as those who are on the distribution side. Meta, LinkedIn, and of course there are companies like Meta, Google, and Microsoft who sit in between and play both roles. But we were able to pull together aligned commitments that were strong about what we were willing to do. And if you haven't looked at it, there's information out there. We have sort of 7 guiding principles and then 8 firm commitments. But we looked at things like prevention. We wanted to start at the very beginning and say, what should we be doing to stop some of this deceitful use of AI from emerging in the first place? Like, what are the prevention options that we should be looking into? The Accord itself doesn't get into a lot of granularity. And that's been something that we've heard feedback on from civil society and others. And it's a fair comment. One of the reasons it doesn't get into a lot of granularity is because I just mentioned we have very diverse products involved here. So when we talked about things like provenance and watermarking, we had to be really cautious not to prescribe a single solution, in part because the different companies have different products and not everything makes sense to use in the same way, but also we didn't want to get in the way of innovation because this is an evolving space. But I still think we held ourselves to some pretty firm commitments. To your point about where it's gone from there, we were really pleased to see on the day essentially that we released this in February, 10 of the companies, including Microsoft, put out their own blogs detailing how they were going to enforce those commitments. And that was really welcome. And it wasn't a coordinated effort, actually. We were surprised when we saw some of the companies did that. And we were really pleased to see it because we knew as a company that we would get a lot of pushback, that when you put out these commitments and they're voluntary and there's just no real enforcement, that maybe it was just a big PR thing and we were going to move on. And so we said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to actually put down on paper what this means for us and how we're actually going to follow through on it. And we were pleased to see a lot of the other companies did the same thing. A little bit about what that means for us, and then I'm happy to talk about what others have committed to. But from our perspective, one of the things that we have been hearing is that people feel like they have no control. So if a politician is deep-faked, they don't know what to do, and that's very scary. So we're trying to build out some things that can give them a sense of control about what they can do. In addition to the responsibilities we have on the prevention side, on the provenance and labeling side, which is on us for sure, on their end, we've built a portal where any candidate or campaign committee can submit if they believe that they've been deep-faked, and we'll immediately put it into an investigation and be responsive. If something we find violates our policies and it's on our platforms, we'll take it down. We'll help and support communication with other companies if that's what we need to be doing there. But it's just trying to give them a place where they don't have to go, through each of the Microsoft products and find a button where they can submit a form, right? Like, let's just make this easier on folks and say, here's where you go if you think you've been deep-faked, and you'll actually be interacting with a real team that's available with, I don't know our exact SLA, but we respond very quickly, and we'll actually give you some information about what we found. We're also looking at what we can do on sort of the detection side. And to be clear, there's a lot of questions about detection in this space. It's not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet, like all of those words, right? It's not. The technology isn't there yet necessarily, but it is an important part of the process. So as much as it is important to have efforts around provenance and watermarking and labeling, indirect and direct disclosures, those are all incredibly essential, and we've invested a lot of time and effort into that, and we do that in our own products. There's also a role for what is civil society or journalists, or what are people to do when something's out there and they just don't know? They can't tell. Has it been manipulated by AI? Like, is this AI generated? How do you know? And so there are some detection capabilities. The challenge, I don't mean to get too nerdy here, but this seems like a crowd that maybe likes to get a little nerdy. The classifiers and the different detection systems, if you make them publicly available, the bad guys figure out how to get around them. And so as we all in tech are working on classifiers in these improved detection mechanisms, we can't just turn them over because then they'll be useless. And so that's a huge challenge that we're all sort of trying to figure out. And we just formed a partnership with True Media, which is a nonprofit formed out of Seattle, where we will provide our technology and they will then kind of serve in a capacity where they will work with civil society and journalists, and they will be the ones that support and do some of the detection mechanisms. So there's a protection layer around the classifier, but we can provide our technology in a way that then people on the other side of it can actually use it. So that's new. It's a new model. We'll see how it works. We're looking at other things like that. So I could go on. There's lots of elements to the Accord, but these are some of the things that we're thinking about, some of the challenges that we're facing. But would love to hear more from you guys.
Thank you so much, Ginny. Very, very interesting to hear both about the Accord, but also some of the steps that have been taken to start implementing. Very useful information on the portal, which if you didn't know about it, it's up and anyone can use it. And also, thanks for being so honest also about the challenges with being transparent about the detection capabilities and the ways that you're getting around that. But so we'll continue talking, but we'll turn now to David Levine from the Alliance for Securing Democracy at the German Marshall Fund. David, you have now in your role, you're working internationally on election integrity. You're looking into AI as well. You'll tell us about the handbook that you just produced, but you also have a lot of experience from the US running elections. So what we're seeing globally on AI and elections is something that we know will affect the US elections in November. And so what we wanted to hear from you is, what are the main lessons that we can draw from the global situation that you're observing, or the emerging experience, to protect the integrity of elections in the United States in a context of AI, and also, but also to harness the opportunities that AI provides. Over to you, David.
Sure. Annika, no, I really appreciate it. I appreciate International IDEA for putting this on, the Embassy of Canada for being able to do this and to be here with these esteemed panelists. I'll try and keep the remarks brief to touch on Alberto, because I want to obviously have a bit of the back and forth. But I think, as someone who observes elections, for example, around the world with the OSCE, but also has sort of previously also administered elections here in the US, I think there are a few things that I think are worth noting, and it touches on something you said at the outset that our panelists have touched on, which is this sort of two-way flow of information back and forth. And I would focus sort of on three things. All right, one is sort of the awareness, right? And we're doing that now, and we're talking about, right, when we're talking about AI, whether we're talking about deepfakes, whether we're talking about the threats during the pre-election cycle, during the election, post-election, what are we talking about, right? I think the second piece I think that's sort of helpful is on the education side, right? It's sort of, okay, we got awareness of these things, but how do we make sure that we, to borrow a what is it from Katie Harbaugh? It's panic responsibly. Thank you. Didn't want to get it wrong in the quote, but I think being able to in a calm, cool, and collected manner try and work through these issues, and then that third piece, right, is this collaborative sort of piece as well, and the collaborative piece takes on different forms, right? It's the public and private, right, collaborative. It's also, though, frankly, between countries. I think, I don't know, normally if I did this, I would tell people about about what ODNI, CISA, and FBI came out with a few weeks ago, this 8-pager on foreign malign influence operations, and took a show of hands for how many people read it. I might not get any hands. My guess is if I did it here, that number would go up, there you go, a bit higher than that. And I think what was telling about that, right, aside from the, a few things were sort of telling about it, even aside from the fact from my former colleague, Jess Brand, is now sort of doing really good work over there, is that we weren't just talking about the lessons in the United States, right? When we talked about the tools and the tactics that folks ought to be aware of, we alluded to what happened in Slovakia recently. We talked about what were going on in other countries at the hands of authoritarian actors like Russia, China. I can't remember if we got Iran explicitly in there, but I think that's really, really important, and it dovetails with sort of our work, right, at the Alliance for Securing Democracy, whereas post-2016, I know that there's sort of, oh, goodness gracious, we're not trying to sort of go back there, right, Russian interference, cyber attacks on voter registration systems, but I think it's really worth noting that the foreign malign influence operation piece remains really important, and that folks can't think of AI as sort of an entirely separate notion, right? What we're talking about is something that allows for, right, the tactics that autocratic entities have historically been able to use. It allows for them in many cases to do it cheaply, or perhaps a little more effectively, right? And we've now heard a little bit about this in the information operation context. We've heard a bit about this in the cyber context. But those, of course, are only sort of two tools in the toolkit, right? And we could sort of talk about a number of others. But I think what's really been interesting here, I think are sort of a few things. I mean, I know that, I will say, because you mentioned it, when we talk about the AI and Election Security Handbook, that me and my colleague, Lindsay Gorman, who's, frankly, she would have been more interesting for you all and more informative. She's a rock star. But one of the things I think would have become apparent from that was that we really did this with sort of the U.S. 2024 elections in mind. And of course, one of the things that's very interesting today is, it's a different conversation to be talking about opportunities for AI, right? When you're talking about perhaps an election in the fall of 2025 as opposed to 2024. I think, to cite just a Brennan Center survey that came out recently, I see Liz Howard here in the front, notwithstanding, and we'll get into some examples of what the U.S. has done, the number of election officials and offices that are making use of AI is still quite low. And I can't recall, and I can get the correction here, but it's still, my guess is it's disproportionately amongst, right, bigger jurisdictions, folks who have the ability to sort of use that expertise. It would be sort of almost an abdication of responsibility for me to say, it's great to talk about how we need human oversight, and that's really important when we're talking about AI processes, and we all write that in our reports, and that's, But, to your point, what does that look like, and what expertise do you need to sort of do that so that it's not rubber stamping? This gets at sort of Julia's point about this sort of notion of reliance on others, right? And I think that's a sort of really interesting issue. And so, I know that when we did the AI election security handbook, a lot of what we focused on, right, to Alberto's paper sort of touched on, was sort of, was a bit more on sort of the threat side, because it really was narrowly tailored to the 2024 election cycle. And so what, we talked about, right, the kinds of making sure that if you're going to do something, you're going to find a way to do it in a way so that you have a plan B. If there's a way that you can utilize AI, right, we talk about how it, you have greater sort of cyber risk, but what's your plan going to be in the event that there is, right, there is a particular, maybe there's a cyber intrusion, right? What's your backup going to be, right? There are jurisdictions in the United States that have had situations even before AI became a big issue where they've found themselves with, part of their, checking their mail ballot signature system suddenly went offline. And if that goes offline, then, you need to make sure maybe you've got a state system that you're going to use perhaps to help you. But if the state system is not working well, then what is that sort of plan? And I know when I was an Ada County election official, and this was pre-2020, so, but I remember there was really intense conversations about whether we got rid of, and I don't know how many election officials, I see the former Vermont Secretary of State here in the crowd, but what you did with all those voter cards that you had, those voter registration cards, because small offices, and one of those, right, it's not a sort of a big deal, but bigger ones, one of the best things about having online voter registration, for example, was the feeling that, okay, I could take all my cards and I could sort of put them away in some mishmash pile that, after umpteen months I could not have to worry about. Well, I think that's, if there's a ransomware attack that's sort of now, that might come up that's AI infused, does that change the calculus? And so, I think, what's been interesting in the U.S., that, just to bring it back to something you'd mentioned, I think a few examples, and again, I welcome others to jump on in, that I think are going to be helpful for the global community, but I also, the other way. One is I think we've seen some really interesting exercises that states have done around some AI tabletop stuff. Right? There's some really good work that's being done out of the state, that's been out of the state of Arizona. A few folks in this room have been more intimately involved in that than I, but to sort of, so that folks have a real understanding for what it means when, there's an official that says something and it seemingly looks real to them, but it's in fact not, right? How do you detect it? How do you recover from it? We've also seen a similar sign of exercise that's been done in Minnesota, right? What's the plan that you've got? Now, I won't weigh in. I think I have my own views and others may have here. Obviously, folks are aware of what took place in the New Hampshire primary, right? With the sort of, with the video that was, right, supposedly, right, of President sort of Joe Biden. And, there are, I think, again, regardless of how good you thought the response was, how quickly you respond to that situation matters. And it touches on some of the points that were made about sort of the campaign piece. And then, again, this collaborative piece is really sort of important. You know, the fact that we saw that publication come out from CISA, ODNI, FBI really matters. And, you know, in the US, it's different, obviously, because of the fact that it's sort of more decentralized in a number of respects than some of the other countries we're talking about. But I think this is, you know, we're at a really critical moment here because we need these entities and others to play a role and step in, right? Because we don't want to rely on, and by the way, it's not just in the US, it's in other countries. You don't just want your election management personnel to be shouldering the load, right? It's sort of a whole of society effort. But we're also very mindful of sort of the politicization of this, right? And sort of how you sort of, you know, how you sort of go from there. And so, you know, I certainly was, you know, interested to hear what others have come and have been studying the AI Act, right? Obviously, to sort of hear about, again, the proportionality, right? And the other principles that you sort of mentioned to sort of, you know, we may be too late in the US, certainly in the 2024 cycle there, but to look over the rainbow. But I think, and I'll just sort of add here, this has to, if it hasn't already, right, cemented the fact that if we're going to protect our elections and take advantage of opportunities in our current climate, that, you know, we need to be doing it not just sort of between states or between countries, but sort of, right, within the international community. You know, even on the opportunity side, what's sort of really important about the paper that came out right there was, you know, if you're thinking about whether or not you're going to change your voting locations and use AI, you know, it's really important to be, I mean, the things that were talked about in that report, you know, you have to be sort of mindful of what things are sort of paramount for you. You know, do you just have election day voting or do you have early voting? And what is it that you're going to have AI do for you? Is it just going to be how far away you are? Thank you. How far away you are, or other things that you need to be mindful of, such as, you know, voter public sentiment, how secure the voting facility is, how safe it might be for poll workers, et cetera.
Thank you so much, David, for these useful insights. And I'm going to turn back over to my colleague, Alberto. And I should have said this from the beginning, but if there's any people in the room that don't know what International IDEA is exactly, I'll just give you a little refresher. International IDEA is an intergovernmental organization with 35 member states. The US is an observer, Canada is a member state. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary next year. We're Think and a Do organization. So, and we have the mandate, the sole mandate, to strengthen and advance democracy around the world. And electoral processes is a key focus area for us when it comes both to our global comparative knowledge work, but also our technical assistance work. We have 20 country programs around the world where we provide capacity building to electoral and democratic stakeholders inside and outside of government, in the electoral sphere, but also in many other areas of democratic reforms. So at the country level, we work mainly with newer and emerging democracies. But this report draws on examples from all over, the report that Alberto just presented. And we try to also foster learning and exchange between countries, newer and older democracies, and also between our member states. So you emphasized, David, the importance of learning between countries. Actually, we are starting an initiative where we have a more systematic exchange of experience between electoral commissions that are member states of International IDEA. We're doing the first in-person event actually in June, and we'll discuss a number of issues that are critical to this super election cycle, but AI is going to be one of them. But Alberto, turning back over to you, you presented in the report a lot of the options that EMBs, the electoral commissions, can use to use AI as a positive tool for managing electoral processes, but also counter the threats. And there are many implications of what you found. So since we're here in the US, I wanted to ask you, is there anything that electoral authorities here in the US at the state level can do, drawing from the recommendations in your report, to be better prepared ahead of November?
Thank you, Annika. I think David has basically gone through all my points here, but I will repeat them. The first one is to increase capacity, and that's very easy to say, very difficult to do. But not only in the US, all EMBs need to increase their capacity, train, raise awareness internally, get also awareness to their constituencies, to the people they're talking to, not just regular citizens, but also internally in the country. And especially collaborate with other agencies. A lot of the expertise that might be needed might lay already in other agencies within government. So when we speak about cybersecurity, there is probably an agency that has that expertise already. So work with them on all these things, basically to increase your capacity. But the second point I have is not only internally in your own government, look outside and talk to other electoral management bodies, other organizations working on this, but especially other electoral management bodies. They will have lessons. Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia have recently gone through elections where artificial intelligence has played a role one way or another. Talk to them, like get to know what they have done, what else maybe you cannot gather just by reading the news. And distill these lessons and apply those lessons. Third point that I have has already been mentioned as well, is panic responsibly. You need to panic, but be responsible in that panic. Don't think this happened completely everything, but at the same time, think about what might be the implications. And that has been a little bit the intention of our publication. You need to know what might be coming in order to be ready. A fourth point is something that I think is often ignored, which is your digital public infrastructure as an EMB. You need to think about many things, but you need to think about how the digital infrastructure that you're using helps or hinders your efforts in terms of what are the data protection rules that apply to your digital infrastructure. How much do you own the infrastructure versus is owned by other actors? When vendors go and try to sell EMB things, flashy things, think about the implications at the infrastructure level that will have. Will you be comfortable with using cameras that had been produced by a company in a country you don't want to be snooping through your cameras? That type of questions that are often ignored should be considered. And without wanting to get too geeky, but that has a whole supply chain consideration that, going back to my first point, an EMB might not be able to consider, but there are people in government that can help with those things. And the last point that I have is, I don't know how to explain this, but do not set for one idea and just run with it. This is an evolving technology. The uses are evolving. I like what you say, Jeannie, that you cannot publish certain information because then you give the bad guys an advantage and then you will have to redo that. That will keep happening. The more we say we give recommendations on how to address these things, the more the people using artificial intelligence will avoid those recommendations and try something else. The more we put pressure on social media companies to act, the more they move to encrypted networks. So keep an open mind because the regulation is going to change, the uses, the techniques, and the procedures are going to change, and you will need to adapt. Don't just think passing one law it's going to solve things, or getting a plan for addressing artificial intelligence will be enough for the next 25 years. That's probably not even enough for the next election. So consider that, be flexible, and I know that's asking a lot from a governmental institution, but try to be as flexible as possible and adaptable as possible to the change that will come.
Thank you so much, Alberto. I had a couple of other questions, but I think we're running out of time, actually, and we wanted to give the opportunity for the audience to ask questions also to the panelists. So are there any questions? If you have any questions, raise your hand, maybe give your name and the organization that you represent. And I don't know if we have actually microphones. Yes. my colleague Alex maybe can pass around the microphone.
Thanks, Alberto. First off, thank you for this panel. It's been really informative and interesting. I have a question for Ginny, and welcome reflections from others as well about something that keeps me up at night. So when you talked about the AI Accord and the companies that signed on, talking about responsible actors who are eager to ensure that their products aren't being abused and have a vested interest in trying to make that reality happen. I wonder how you think about or how it played out in those conversations around the role of open source models or state-backed models. So these are China, Russia, North Korea, who are actively trying to figure out how do we use AI to disrupt democracies and disrupt the information space around democracies. And I'm curious to what degree that was part of the conversation in terms of conceiving of a responsibility for the broader information space. And I'm curious from the other panelists if there's pieces you're thinking about when we look at responses, mitigation, when it comes to these models in particular.
Yeah, it's a really great question. Obviously, some of the companies represented also sort of have open source models, which I recognize is a bit confusing. So it's not that open source wasn't a part of the conversation, but there was no way for us to like invite the other models in because they're open source. So it was definitely a part of the conversation. What we decided was there were so many paths we could go down where it was like, this is not sufficient or this is not perfect and it's missing this component and this component. We decided to control what we could. And to hold ourselves accountable to the things that we could be accountable to. That's not dismissive of other threats. It's not dismissive of other challenges. It was just we have to start from somewhere. There were a lot of those conversations where, you know, as you can imagine, you get that many companies together to debate these really challenging issues. There were a lot of disagreements about things. But one thing we agreed on is like we have to agree on baselines and build from there. And so it's not to take away from your question, I completely agree, but it wasn't something that we decided we could tackle just given the components. One thing though I will add that I didn't mention previously that builds on that is, and David got to this a bit, there's such a huge component of this that is about like sort of societal resilience, literacy and education efforts, where if we can get to a point where we have societies that are skeptical, that think twice, that go look for authoritative information when presented with something that seems suspicious, if there is a silver bullet in all of this, as people keep saying, that's probably the closest we're going to get. And then at that point, you're in a less of a dependency upon the open source question versus you know, the traditional tech companies. Not to take away from all of our responsibilities, but I'm just saying that is an element that I don't think we've talked about a lot today, but is hugely important and something that we've all made commitments towards.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
A question about the role of media, and two things that struck me about some of the comments that were made earlier. I think it was you who made the comment about, or maybe it was you, sorry, David, about a whole of society approach, and that the burden or the responsibility can't solely fall on election boards and election officials. And Ginny, you also made the comment about a partnership with True Media. And the question that I wanted to ask was, where does traditional media or more traditional media outlets fall into how we build that resilience and that whole of society approach? A lot of the discussion understandably focuses on social media, but when we think about freedom of speech, freedom of press, of journalism, would love to hear, you know, how you see that being a part of the solutions and building that resilience.
Do you want to go ahead, David?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll take a couple of quick things. You know, I think there's been some recent research that's gone out there that notwithstanding all the other different sources of media people have, that there are still large segments of the American population that rely on, right, certain, right, mainstream media to be able to sort of do what they have to do. I know one of my colleagues, GMF, is doing a project actually for the Mexico elections where they're working with a media outlet, and they're working about on how to do sort of content authenticity, right, to introduce, right, authenticity sort of into sort of that element. And I think, you know, that is just an example, but it sort of speaks to sort of the you know, what one can do to sort of show the receipts, right, to sort of indicate that, what they're reporting on is important. I think the other thing that's, really important as well is that, at a time when, there are still, it varies between countries, places that, folks feel like they can turn to, right? I think this varies, but, there's still a number of, there are places, there are news deserts here in the U.S., obviously. There are other places that, we can talk, that's a sort of separate conversation. But I think for those media outlets that have, right, continue to, right, really prioritize the importance in terms of being reputable and accurate and authentic and honest, I think being able to sort of figure out what those policies are going to be in place really matters. I do think that, we've seen, particularly since 2016, 2020, at least my experience, certainly at the national level, is that, for example, a number of these entities have gotten folks that really know elections. There was time when basically, if I'm being honest, it was Pam Fessler and it was Pam Fessler. And I think the same kinds of sort of thing needs to be sort of happening, right, in terms of having folks that you're bringing in who can sort of help ensure that, right, when people see an image that's not of the Pentagon, right, we know how we're going to sort of deal with that situation and what we're going to do in response.
So I'd actually say, I think the news desert piece is directly correlated. When you look at the example you gave earlier of the Biden robocall, the media, the role they played in debunking that very quickly, doing their fact checking and getting that word out to the public was essential. What happens when it's a mayoral campaign in a news desert where there's no local news? Who is going to be the fact checker? Who is going to be the organization that pays attention to that? As we see decline in local news, particularly in the US, but this is a global phenomenon, and we see the rise of disinformation, whether it's AI enabled or otherwise, it's incredibly concerning of who's going to be sort of the voice of authenticity on the ground that's going to catch those things, not to mention all the other implications of local news going away, like government fraud and, all of those other, who's holding the capital to account. But I think there's a huge role for media to play in being I use the term fact checker, I would say not generally as that, but just to be on top of things, to be doing the research and to be the trusted voice. That's still essential.
If I may add something, the biggest vector of disinformation spread are leaders. And they only get to do that when media jumps into that crazy thing they say. That's media responsibility, not to be the mechanism used or manipulated by leadership to pollute the information environment. And I think, and I know how difficult it is for a media outlet not to jump on something that a politician has said, even for fact-checking that statement. Because at the end of the day, they're not trying to convince people about something, they're trying to change your way of making sense of reality. So I think that the role the media has in not amplifying disinformation that comes from leadership, which is the one that people trust, it's fundamental.
Yeah, I think I'll just, and this also, I think maybe addresses Lisa's comment a little bit as well, but I mean, I think the, digital literacy, media responsibility, all of this is playing a role, but I think, even bigger here is transparency and accountability. And I think this is one place where, disinformation from generative AI does make things more complicated, right? It is exacerbating a pre-existing issue, which is, disinformation tactics are very effective. That's why people use them. And right now, there are very few disincentives, right, to engage, if you're, especially for political actors. There is this challenge of credible sources being able to compete with, the massive flow of non-credible information. But generative AI content will make transparency and accountability more difficult. And I think this is a role for election observers. This is a role for media, especially to really try to build more accountability around the use of manipulative tactics, whether it's political actors that are generating or just amplifying or even just benefiting from these kind of tactics. Sort of, how do we make this a little gauche, right? Like, how do we build some disincentives here? And I think, the media has a big role to play in that.
Thank you so much. There is a lot more to discuss. I wish we had more time, but we're coming to the end of our session. And let's see this as the beginning of the conversation. Also, feel free to ask the panelists questions afterwards. There's going to be some lunch served after we finish. But now I wanted to turn over to Commissioner Benjamin Hovland, the chairman of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, for some closing remarks. For those of you who are watching online from abroad who may not know what the EAC is, it's an independent bipartisan commission established by the Help America Vote Act, and the mission is to help election officials improve the administration of elections and help Americans participate in the voting process, and they do it through guidelines, guidance, and information, acting as an information clearance. So the panelists, I'll thank you very, very much for all your interesting contributions. I'll ask you to step down and we'll hand over to Commissioner and Chairman Benjamin Hovland. Over to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for allowing me for the opportunity to close out this thought-provoking panel. I'd also like to thank our friends from the Canadian Embassy for hosting this event, and of course, I'd like to applaud the international idea on the release of this timely report on AI for electoral management. I know it's the end here, but you know, if you've been to other AI presentations or panels, this is usually the part where I believe when we're discussing this topic that I'm supposed to wow you with the fact that these remarks were generated by AI. Unfortunately, I didn't do that. So this probably took a little longer than it should have, and anything that I say that is wrong is my own fault. I suspect this is what future generations will call artisanal comments. So enjoy these and know in the future you'll look back at this fondly. So again, my name is Ben Hovland. I am the current chair of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. As Annika mentioned, we are an independent bipartisan commission, and we're the only federal agency in the United States focused solely on election administration. You know, when we look at this issue, the growing use and sophistication of AI tools in our day-to-day work in elections is inevitable. This conversation is so important today because this is an area that we can't bury our head in the sand and hope to avoid it. This is coming, it is here, and so much of the work that needs to be done you know, will continue on and determine how our elections are run and the experience for voters around the world. As was mentioned today and in the report, much of the discussion in the United States has centered around the immediate concerns about mis and disinformation, malinformation, the ability to lower the barrier to entry and to significantly amplify that, particularly obviously with a focus on the upcoming November general election. But the report and the conversation today, I think, have highlighted that there's a lot more nuance to this topic. You know, these are real challenges, but there are other areas to think about, both for election administrators, both in the United States and around the world. You know, I think about, I was at a conference recently in Portland of election administrators, and there was a demonstration of some of what AI could do. And in the United States, elections are largely underfunded or largely funded at the local level. You have many small offices throughout the country who are running elections. And so the examples were given, of course, of some of the shortcuts that AI could provide. One of the examples was, please plan, or entered into the prompt, plan a 3-day conference for election officials in Vermont. And, you know, out popped a pretty good first draft. That saves a lot of time on formatting. Again, you would want to edit that and put in some good things. But again, I think the audience was impressed, and there will be opportunities for time saving and efficiencies for particularly small offices if they have it. But the challenge around disinformation is going to be massive. We've already seen what this looks like without the assistance of AI. I think that we're absolutely going to need to see dedicated funding to voter education. In the United States, voter education is optional in most states. It is often put on the back burner. Some states require a voter ed pamphlet or particular things, but so often this is looked at in the United States as optional and not focused on and not prioritized. I think we are entering in an information environment that it is no longer optional to do that kind of voter education. The United States gets a lot of benefits from our decentralized nature of our elections, but particularly on information, it creates real challenges when we're in Washington, D.C. The traditional mainstream media news that's on the news at night, that hits Virginia, West Virginia, the District of Columbia, and Maryland. And so when they say early voting starts today, it might in Virginia, but it doesn't in those other places. And that's simply, that's not bad actors. That's not the other challenges. And I think, so we need to see investment and resources dedicated to that voter education. And I think we need to recognize that when we get to, hopefully we get to that place that Ginny talked about, where we invest in societal awareness and skepticism, healthy skepticism to get to trusted sources. But between where we are now, where some people have been believing too much information, along the way to that point, we're also going to have a generation of people that don't believe anything. And so how do we address that? How do we serve those voters, and how do we have them believe in our democracy? These are all challenges that are on the horizon. And again, I think AI will be a part of that challenge. It can also be a part of that solution. And so I'll just say again, thank you for being here. I think that AI is an area, as was mentioned earlier, that the entire global elections community is and will be grappling with. We all are able to benefit from conversations like this one today. And while we are at the close of this panel, we're just at the start of many discussions and debates to come on this issue. And so I look forward to keeping the conversation going and learning with all of you. Thank you.
So thank you so much to all of you who've come here to participate in this discussion. Thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to the Embassy of Canada. Thanks to Commissioner Chairman Hovland. We're coming to the end and we're wrapping up. So thanks for coming, and lunch is served outside. You're free you're welcome to stay and enjoy and chat with the public and the panelists. So thank you for coming.